This is a podcast by the Straits Times.
Everyone works for a salary, and of course we hope that the job we earn the salary for has some meaning to it or lets us seek out meaning in other ways. But of course, beyond this simple premise, the nuances start diverging across different groups of younger workers, as we have found in a survey that we at the Straits Times recently published. And as such, in this episode, we find out what attitudes youth in Singapore have towards pay and where these stem from. Hello, I'm Tay Hong Yi, business journalist at the Straits Times. You're listening to our revamped podcast series, HeadSTart on Record. Get a head start in your personal finance and career with us. My first guest is an experienced corporate veteran who has consulted extensively on how to structure pay packages and benefits for over 3 decades. He has also had extensive experience building and leading teams himself and channeled all that practical experience into a doctorate on the topic of executive remuneration. He is Dr Fermin Diez, and he's currently an adjunct professor at 2 local universities who is widely sought after for his thoughts on talent issues. My second guest is a young professional working as a business development manager for a robotics firm, and all while studying for a degree in marketing at the Singapore University of Social Sciences at the same time. He's Mr. Jonathan Ng. Welcome to the show, Fermin and Jonathan.
Thank you for having us.
Happy to be here.
So maybe I'll just start with Jonathan to share with your relatively unique experience, as both someone who's in the workforce and also studying. And maybe to start with, what do you do in your work currently?
Interesting start. Well, I work for a robotics company in Singapore called Otsaw. The quick rundown is we were founded in the Silicon Valley, then moved back to Singapore to set up our HQ. At Otsaw, we do robotics and I'm business development manager there. Day-to-day in my life looks like we're hunting for deals, trying to see which deal in the market in US or in Europe, what kind of deals can come back to us that will drive the business bottom line, give us more profitability, bring us more revenue. So my job is fun and I like it. And I think there's much more to come from me in this role.
So then, you're studying and you're working at the same time. How do you feel like doing this has influenced your views towards salaries and what you should do to deserve the salary compared to maybe some of your peers who haven't entered the workforce yet?
So for me, the way I enter this conversation is, sometimes when I look at YouTube and all, I see a lot of street interviews asking them like, hey, let's say you are this age, when you graduate, how much do you think you should get? And sometimes some of the answers I hear are like, wow, the numbers are quite big, the numbers are quite small, but I think when it comes to negotiating for a salary or even thinking of what kind of package you should take home, you have to be realistic about it and you have to build up this track record from maybe, let's say if you're a student, you start from internships, go to internships, build up records, build up achievements, and along the way, you can ask for a bigger salary once you have built up that track record. And the second thing you must show to your company is what can you bring to the table. So I think coming into every conversation, I'm clear about these 2 things. 1, what I've done. Second thing, it's what else can I bring to the table. With these 2 ideas in mind, I then try to guide the conversation towards this direction. So I would say I'm very realistic about what I ask for, and because I'm already a working professional, I fall back a lot on what I've done in my work or my internship or what kind of social capital I've built outside of my work and use this thing to try to guide the conversation on where I think I want to be at in terms of salary.
So what do you think about that, Fermin, based on what he shared?
It's interesting to see what's happening. I have studied this of late for the last 2-3 years. It started with COVID because it was quite apparent during COVID that at least the newer generation has a different view about pay than the older generation. It's a generation that has grown up having personalized choice for everything else they have. They get their own TV chosen by the provider. They get their own products offered on the internet according to the providers. And yet the companies that they work for have a one-size-fits-all approach that it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how much experience you have, it doesn't matter what are your preferences, that we will only pay you one specific way. And we find that that's not true. We find that The newer generation would like to have personalized pay. They would like to choose. They would like to have choice. And we see some very interesting examples in companies like Unilever and Shopify and Netflix, where they are giving people choice. How much base salary would you like to have versus how much variable pay would you like to have? And this is a very interesting way of doing it, because in moving to flexibility and personalization, what the companies are basically choosing to do is giving each employee the choice to say, I will work for higher base but lower incentives. Now, what's interesting about that is that many in the HR community still feel like, oh, no, because people only work for money. And I think another thing that has shifted in this new generation is that many don't really work for the money. Don't get me wrong, money matters. They want to make, like everybody else, as much as possible. However, maybe in John's case, this is not what's happening, but in the case of many people, they don't wake up in the morning at any given point in time thinking, what am I going to do today to maximize my bonus? What will I decide when I look at this email that I'm going to do about it so that my bonus is as big as it's going to get at the end of the year? Most people don't think like that. They want to make sure that they do a good job. They work for autonomy. They work for mastery. They work for purpose. They don't necessarily work to maximize their pay. So this notion is definitely shifted in the minds of people, however, not yet in the minds of the companies providing pay. So we still see the same way of paying, even though the way people want to be paid is very different.
So, John, based on what you have heard from there, how do you feel like salary factors into the equation when it comes to opportunities? Do you balance it against other considerations?
Yeah, so for this, I think right now the conversation circles around things outside of money. So things like purpose, mastery, ambition, belief, all these things comes into the conversation when we start to talk about salary. So for myself, it's important to find a salary that you're comfortable with, meaning that the money has to be attractive. But outside of this conversation, I have to consider things such as purpose or ambition, or whether this is something that I want to do for the rest of my life, or whether this is an industry that I want to go really deep into. So yeah, this conversation has shifted. Back in the days, it's more about survival. People would say, you give me this amount, I'm going to come in for you. But today, it's not like that. Today, it's more of where is the balance in this? Where is the part where I can get the best of everything? I get this package that is not high, but it's suitable for me, it's balanced, and I also get other benefits such as work from home, such as you give me commissions, such as you give me money to buy tech accessories, maybe what kind of communities you have in your workplace. And as all these things comes into play, I realized that the conversation around salary is no longer so straightforward. Money is not the end-all or be-all. And for employers and employees to come to the middle ground, there's a lot to be done in this conversation. Because right now, it's almost like two different ends with two different opinions. Yeah, that's how I see it.
And the other interesting thing I also noticed is that on the flip side, when you talk about growth prospects, community, and these are things that are intangible, but they can also pay off in their own ways in the long run if you ultimately are more motivated, if you ultimately have these networks, and these actually have some benefits, just not up front as well. But, this is something maybe Fermin has some thoughts on as well.
Well, Hong Yi is interesting because for the first time in my nearly 4 decades of doing HR, I see people passing up on promotions. And this is pay related because you would have thought, everybody wants more money and therefore a promotion is a bigger thing. And then, no, now HR departments have had to add an extra step in their promotions to say, okay, once we decided that this person, we want them promoted, we need to ask them first if they will accept the promotion before taking it. On the other hand, it used to be the perceived notion that companies would take care of your career. Now people take care of their own careers. And a lot of what John is saying, it has to do with, well, I like to do this because it's fun, but eventually I also want to do that because that looks fun too. And then maybe at a later point I want to do that other thing because that also looks fun. And eventually you'll see that careers are being crafted not necessarily as they used to be, vertically up, but rather horizontally because you want to learn more skills, you want to be more knowledgeable. It's an interesting thing of what's happening in this is as a generation shift, because we clearly still have in corporations models that were aimed at older ways of thinking, not older as in age, but older as in antiquated ways of thinking, whereas the new ways of thinking, we need to find other ways to assess that, which is why I think things like personalization of pay, this trend is one that will continue, and it won't be the only one. So one of the things that's really interesting, Hong Yi, is that companies have not changed the way they pay people in 80 years. I mean, the way we still decide how to pay is predicated on principles that started during World War II in the United States, and we're still doing it the exact same way. You know, variable pay for performance, everybody's motivated by a bonus, carrots and sticks. It turns out that the generations have changed. The way we perceive about work has changed. Your survey says the same. Even when John talks about it, he says that it's different. But we continue to see companies doing exactly the same thing. In fact, let me tell you, with this whole idea of the future of work, we already see how technology has imbued the way we recruit. We now use artificial intelligence to recruit. We see a lot of differences in how we do learning and development. We now have learning on the go and apps. But in compensation, we are still doing the exact same thing. The last change in the area of compensation, would you care to guess? It happened in the 1990s, and that was flexible benefits. I've been doing compensation for nearly 40 years, and that is the only change I have seen in the way companies pay since I started doing this.
And this is even more jarring because evidently from the survey, we're seeing quite significant generational differences in attitudes towards pay, but the structure and the format through which pay is decided has not changed with these attitudes.
And this needs to change. And I think what this conversation really points to is that companies need to rethink the way they do compensation.
Yeah, because I think it has to imbue so many other different things, right? Like this desire for work-life balance, benefits, as we talked about, as well as the sense of purpose and non-linear career pathways as well.
Correct. And include that in what actually is rewarding and motivating for people, not just money.
Are you listening, HR departments? With this perception of work is, this sort of non-linearity, this sort of doing these things and building it up, into this career story that hopefully, the dots connect back as you look back, and hopefully it does pay off. It doesn't always, but in some ways it does in the future. I think that's a very interesting shift that we are also observing as well. And, on this point about kind of intergenerational differences, we actually commissioned a survey on the topic, kind of attitudes towards pay across different cohorts. We looked at broadly Gen Zs aged 18 to 27, younger millennials aged 28 to 34, and older millennials aged 35 to 43. And generally, the older the group, the lower the proportion who say they are satisfied with their current salaries and work-life balance. So what are some possible reasons why we're hearing this?
I think the older you are, the more you need money. That is a reality. The older you are, the more you need mortgages. You realize that you need to put aside for retirement. The more you realize that you have to put your kids through school, that you want money for the finer things in life, perhaps to be able to pay for a holiday, or perhaps a newer car, or can we afford a bigger place? So all of a sudden, money plays a much bigger part in what you're trying to do with the rest of your life, not just money as a way to keep in score. Am I better than my classmates from uni? Is much more about, can I provide, can I really afford what I'm trying to do for myself and my family? When you are younger, you have less of those pressures. Your pressures it's interesting, for instance, we always see that when we provide benefits, the younger generation tends to think that they're never going to get sick and that they're never going to die. So they would basically put zero value or very little value on things like health insurance and life insurance. But they will put a lot of value on free time or extra cash. Whereas the older you get, you realize that all of a sudden health insurance matters, life insurance matters, and other things matter. So even if you take slightly less cash, and then if you get even older, once your mortgage is paid and your kids have gone through uni and they have their own life, then you start worrying about retirement and will I have enough money to still live after I stop working? Yeah. So needs change, and because needs change, the central role of a lot of money, quote unquote, is also different.
And of course, as we talk about all these issues, I think one fundamental part of it also ties back to this issue of kind of pay transparency, right? How much is it normalized for people to talk about their salaries? Because I think you need to be able to have that discussion of the salary to really then proceed beyond to say how it then fits into your life and how much you need and what the compromises you're willing to make for a certain level. And this actually touches on a point that was in the survey, where it was striking that there was a gap in perception of how acceptable it is to talk about salaries with others, because more of the Gen Zs, 49%, are comfortable discussing their salaries with colleagues or friends. And this goes down to 42% for younger millennials and an even lower 31% for older millennials. So maybe this is something I'd just like to turn to John for. Personally, how acceptable or how open do you find yourself to talk about your salary and talk about your expectations, not just, with prospective employers, but also just among friends and so on?
So I think the bottom line is talking about salary now or back then has never been easy. That's the truth. But at least for myself, I'm quite clear that with my friends, I'm okay to share, I'm okay to be transparent about my salary. But the thing I cannot account for is what's the reaction going to be. I might be okay to share. I appreciate my friends. I'm okay to share what are the thoughts that I have where I'm trying to decide my package, or where have they given me a bit more, where a bit less. Maybe this benefit I have, this benefit I don't have. I'm okay to be transparent. But it's always the fact that what if I share and they feel like, they've missed out on something? Or if I get maybe a bit more or a bit less, and I'm not sure what kind of dynamics it will create in the relationship that we have. So that is something that I'm cautious about. But on a personal note, I'm more than happy to share. But with your colleagues, it's a different question. Sharing salary with your colleagues, you have to be sensitive about it, especially when you're always the younger person in the workplace. So you share your salary, you have to be considerate that we have all been through different paths in lives to end up at the same company. Your path and the path of your colleagues, they're going to be very different because we grew up in different times, different education. Maybe I did something outside of work that they didn't do. We all have different circumstances, but having us at the same place together and trying to compare us on the same thing, I'm okay with it, but I'm not sure how other people may feel about it. So I think for me, friends, okay to share, but colleagues, I would try to be a bit more careful about it.
It used to be that, in fact, every HR department in every company that I know of has a confidentiality clause in their employment contract. And I'm sure that if you check your own employment contract, John, it'll say something like pay is confidential.
Yeah, for sure.
So help you God kind of thing, yeah? But the reality is that I think like John is sharing, I think the younger generation is not as concerned about this. There's also a little bit of the fact that if you want to find out how much companies pay nowadays, it's not so difficult. Every candidate will do this as a matter of course. They will go check the internet and they will find either in Glassdoor or maybe just in job portals how much the pay should be. There's a lot more information on the internet about that. So nowadays the whole notion that pay is confidential, it's still probably in the policy that way, but not necessarily in practice. I find that pretty much everybody knows what everybody is making. And transparency should be one of those things that the companies ought to consider changing, because the more transparent they become, the more trust they're going to earn from their employees. Now, there's 3 levels of transparency, just to be clear. One level of transparency is, can you explain how your pay policy works? Because even there, some companies are quite mysterious about it. The second is, within that pay policy, where do I fit? So can you at least explain to the employee, why is it that they are paid how much at that particular company? And the third level of transparency would be, can you tell me how much everybody else is getting paid? Now, that last one is actually a bit more complicated because you run into the law. You run into privacy law and PDPA, and so it's not so straightforward. But at least the second level of transparency is something companies should aspire to. And the more they do that, I think the more they will find that they earn trust of employees and that money then stops being such a concern for people. And then you can focus on the other things that you do also as a company. Are you providing enough training? Are you providing enough work-life balance? Are you providing enough opportunities for growth? Are you providing other things? Whereas pay still becomes an issue if people think that they're not paid fairly.
So what is stopping companies then from pursuing this transparency? Are there certain dogmas or assumptions or beliefs that drive this sort of thinking?
I have my own theories on the matter. I have done a bit of research on this, although I can't say conclusively that this is it. But I do have my own theories, and it boils down to 2 things. One, companies are worried that if employees find out exactly how much they're paid versus other employees inside the company, that it will actually create trouble. Trouble in the sense that, hey, how come John is paid more than me when I have more experience than John? And this happens a lot. This happens a lot because it may be that I've been in the company, say, 5, 6, 7 years, whereas John just got hired in from the outside. We had to pay a premium to bring him in, but I was just paid according to policy. So all of a sudden, you find that there's pay inequality. And companies want to, I hate to sound terrible, but it's a bit of sweeping it under the carpet. Like if we don't tell, then it's not happening. Although my belief is that employees do talk to each other. And one day I'm going to ask John over lunch, hey, John, so what was your increase like? I said, I'm very happy. I got another 4%. So I finally made it over, whatever, $10,000, whatever. And I'm going to go, oh, so happy for you. But inside I'm going like, oh, I hate it. So I think that's one reason. The other reason is still this belief that the confidentiality of pay is a good policy. But I think it combined with the first one, it's only a good policy in as much as you think it's preventing additional problems. So my sense is different. We did something very interesting. We actually published salary guidelines for an entire industry in the internet with the idea that if we do that, not only every employee in the industry, but every employee, every candidate would know what the pay levels are. So of course, the first couple of years, the problem was because there was these inequalities, a lot of these distortions came out. But after the second year and into the third year, what companies started to do, because the pay was public, at least the pay policies were public, they started fixing all of their problems. So when companies go around the idea that first I got to fix my problems and then become transparent, I actually encourage to do the other way around. Be brave, be transparent first. That will force you to clean up. And after the cleanup happened, our ability to recruit increased by 650% and our turnover rate decreased by 4 points. So we were much better at retention, much better at attraction, and transparency worked as a policy.
But I would imagine on the employer's side of things, right, it's quite difficult if you have an intergenerational workforce to balance between all these differences, intergenerational differences in attitude. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, that's where I think personalization of pay comes in. I think giving every employee the choice of how much base and how much bonus. I talked about examples. Let me just illustrate with one that I wrote about recently, which is Shopify. Shopify actually gives employees and candidates, what they do with a candidate, just to make it a point, what they do with a candidate is they will send the candidate their total package. Let's say your total package is going to be, let's just come up with a number, $120,000. And then they send them a spreadsheet and said, you can get your pay fully base, no bonus or no incentive, or you can basically allocate between base salary with a minimum of this much, and I think the minimum is like 40,000. It's a small number, and the rest in variable pay. You choose. You tell us exactly how you want to get paid, and you do your calculations in the worksheet and just send us back the worksheet of how you want to get paid. So every employee and every candidate has a choice of how they want to be paid. So if maybe I'm an older generation, as you say, and cash matters because I want to preserve my cash, I'm more conservative, whatever, good. Then maybe I want it all in base pay. But then I take a person like John who believes that, if I work hard, I can get more money, great. Then put more of it in variable pay. Because he doesn't have the economic pressures that the older person say, well, maybe I can take a big gamble, 50-50. So yes, companies can actually do this, and it's already being done.
So John, having heard that, would you rather be told what your package is, or would you rather tell the company what you want your package to be?
I don't mind being heard. I don't mind hearing what my total package is going to be, and I will use that as my starting point to see, do I go up or do I go down from there based on what the market is getting. But then again, I'm just wondering, in the Shopify case, what if they said, I'm going to give you this amount, and you said, can I have everything up front in the first 6 months? And then at 6 months mark, maybe I leave the company. Can I do that?
No, probably not. Probably they'll say it's whatever the fixed amount is. Let's say I use my example, $120,000, $10,000 a month. But no, I don't think that they will give it to you all up front. It would still be linked to the time that you're going to have to work.
I'm just really curious to see whether ideas like this about pay transparency and how pay are structured can be brought to countries like Singapore. I think for us, it's a bit wider than that. So let's say if, they always talk about T-scale individual, how you want to structure yourself. You want to be broad and you want to go deep in many things. And let's say if I have interests outside of work that could value add to the workplace, that could be an added benefit for the company as well.
Right.
But can the company recognize that? That is something that conversation has to happen with maybe your manager or with the HR. But to consider things outside of their job scope, I don't think it'll be an easy conversation.
And on this contemplative note, we end this second episode of HeadStart on Record. Thank you, Dr. Diez and Jonathan, for your insights on what you think about pay and why. It's a pleasure to have both of you on our show.
Thank you.
I'm Tay Hong Yi, and if you have any hot takes or sticky questions about your pay issues, please email me. If you'd like to read my articles in the HeadStart newsletter, or find me on LinkedIn, all these links are in our podcast show notes. I've linked my colleague Priska's story on the survey as well. This podcast episode is edited by Amiru Karim. In the next episode, Suen will be back to talk about the trend of achieving financial independence and retiring early, or FIRE for short. Follow HeadStart on Record if you would like to hear who Going FIRE is for and how to get there. Thanks for listening.
Send your feedback to podcast@sph.com.sg. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or within our Straits Times app. Thanks for listening. Do note, all analyses, opinions, recommendations, and other information in this podcast are for general information purposes only and are not intended to be relied upon as financial advice. You should not rely on them in making any decision. Please consult a fully qualified financial advisor or professional expert for independent advice and verification. To the fullest extent permitted by law, SPH Media shall not be liable for any loss arising from the use of or reliance on any analyses, opinions, recommendations, and other information in this podcast. SPH Media accepts no responsibility or liability whatsoever that may result or arise from the products, services, or information of any third parties. All opinions expressed by participants in this podcast are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of SPH Media.